All right, hello everybody. Welcome to Slam, the podcast that reviews DC superheroes throughout the ages. This is your co-host Mike L, and I'm joined by
Joshua Mervell, and today we are going to be taking a look at the history or the debut of Superman.
That's right. And we are joined by very special guest, Windsor's own Mark Lefebvre.
You can call me Mark L if you like.
Oh, there you
Mark
go.
L?
For tonight's.
Perfect.
And you know, some of our listeners will not see this video clip, but if they do, can you just show us your shirt, please?
Oh, yes.
Look at that. Nice.
Oh, very
So
awesome.
before we jump into this, I take it you are a Superman fan.
Well, yeah, I would say over the years, probably more of a DC fan than Marvel. I've enjoyed series from both, but and a heavy duty Batman kind of guy.
Nice.
But I do enjoy stuff from Big Blue. Mm-hmm.
Nice,
Awesome.
nice. Okay. And also, before we jump into the discussion, why don't we tell everybody kind of what your background is? Like, I know you mostly as a performer, as an actor, and also in Windsor, you're known as the stilt guy, right?
Yeah, well, performing on stilts for, getting close to 20 years now. But I've been a professional actor, singer, dancer for over 30 years. And I said, an avid consumer of comic book medium since I was a kid growing up in the 60s. I think I mentioned that on one of our conversations that, every Christmas in your stockings, I always got comic books. Every time I went to the corner store, I was going to pick up a new issue. So, comic books my entire life.
Oh, that's great. That is amazing. Okay, so before we dive in, we are going to be talking about, just like every episode, we're going to be focusing on the DC superhero and focusing on the many different versions of this character and many different origins of this character. I love Superman. Everyone knows my name is Mike L on the show. But while I have read Action Comics and Superman #1, I've never read these other two origins. What about yourself, Mark? Have you read this Superboy first appearance as well as the other one?
Yeah, no,
Really?
I have, and I've probably, a reprint or something. That if they would have run that story again as a backstory in
Sure.
In the 60s, but yeah, it was interesting doing some more research and finding out about, how the origin was treated in the radio program. You sent me that clip of the radio serials, and they added, the daily newspaper strips. I think they added more early on stuff about Krypton and about Superman's powers than the actual comic books at first.
And that's the thing is, I learn something new every day about Superman, and I don't know exactly what came from where, but I know that Jimmy Olsen was introduced, I think, in the radio series to give Superman someone to talk to. Kryptonite was introduced in the radio series to give an excuse for the actor playing Superman to have a 2-week vacation.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, Superman was just out of
That's
commission.
amazing.
And whenever they wanted to cut over to Superman to find out what he was doing, you just hear him go, and this is no joke. This is real.
Wow.
And also, between the comic strip and the comic book, there was slight differences in, there would have been Jonathan and Martha Kent, or Eben and Sarah Kent, or Jor-El with an E, Jor-El with an L. And even just reading these 4 picks for this week and doing a little bit of research, I found out that, Josh, you're familiar with how the Earth 2 Superman, Golden Age Superman, was Kal-El with just an L, right? And Jor-El with... Okay, well, I learned yesterday that even when Jor-El first appeared, he was called Jor-El with an E, but since Kal-El had been called Kal-El with an L, when they either reprinted it or when they referred to it, they retroactively said it was Jor-El with an L. Now, again, we're losing, if there's any mainstream average listeners out there, they're losing interest quick, so we won't get too into the weeds with this stuff.
We can also, I guess, explain, like, Kal-El is Superman or Clark Kent's, like, true name, like his given name at birth, and then Clark Kent is his Earth name that his adoptive parents gave him.
Right, exactly.
So yeah, I guess that's pretty interesting. I didn't No, it went that far back. The discrepancy of the EL or -L.
So this issue obviously is the first appearance of Superman, and it's unusual in that this was originally created as a comic strip, and then they sort of cut and pasted it and made it into a page of a comic book. By today's standards, this art is very primitive, although I still love it. And they leave things out, so I could almost read this strip out loud. In fact, I'm going to skim read this out loud, okay? So we start off on the first panel. We see a planet exploding. It says Jerome Siegel and Joe Shuster, and it says, as a distant planet was destroyed by old age. Keep in mind, they don't say Krypton. A scientist, unnamed here, a scientist placed his infant son within a hastily devised spaceship, launching it towards Earth. Now, this is the key detail. I'm not sure if anyone noticed this. I have read this issue a million times, and it was only about a year or two ago that I noticed this detail. Josh, did you notice this?
It wasn't Ma and Pa Kent that found the ship.
Exactly.
It was just some person in a car that dropped them off at a orphanage.
Isn't that crazy?
I've definitely read this before too, and I don't know why. It's probably because whenever I think about the origin, I think of the movies and the show, and they always leave out the fact that they bring him to an orphanage. Yeah, I don't think it's besides these comics, I don't think that's ever really been told in that way before.
I think you're right. I don't think that orphanage part has ever been used again. And this passing motorist, this random guy, never used again. Oh, you know what? No, sorry. I postulated this to Mark Waid, and Tom Brevoort from Marvel said that fact was used maybe in the radio show.
Okay.
And that was the only other time.
I was just looking at, because I've got it was the 60th anniversary edition, Superman, The Complete History, that came out in late 98, right? That was in the 60th anniversary. And it shows from the syndicated newspaper strips with a lot of backstory on Krypton. This whole first page is they're still on Krypton, but there's that cute but terribly annoying super baby
wow.
at the orphanage, baffling everyone with his powers.
That's hilarious. And so is that art, is that still Joe Shuster there, or is that can you tell, is it a different artist?
It's Siegel and Shuster, yeah.
Wow, nice. Yeah. Okay.
Wow. And you know what, while we're talking about it, might be jumping the gun a little bit, kind of talking about the next couple of stories we're going to be reading, but that same image, I really kind of like that they've recreated it in every single one of the retellings of the origin. It's like the same pose where it's like the baby in the strongman pose, and he's got like a chair or a table or something in one hand. It's great. It's kind of a nice little touch that's like an iconic panel that's in every single one of his origins. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
So basically, he's turned over to an orphanage. Now in the next little sequence here, this is sort of a prototype for the infamous narration that would come later. So the familiar one is faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. Or here it says, when maturity was reached, he discovered he could easily leap 1/8 of a mile, hurdle a 20-story building, raise tremendous weights, and run faster than an express train. And then it says, and nothing less than a bursting shell could penetrate his skin. I want to point out, that means that a bursting shell can penetrate his skin, which is, I've never noticed that detail either. So it's kind of interesting. So here, then it's funny because then the next sequence it says, early Clark decided, it's like, again, it's kind of sloppily written, right? They're just assuming you know who Clark is. Early Clark decided he must turn his titanic strength into channels that would benefit mankind, and so was created Superman. And then they have a little explanation for how it's possible to have his powers. They show ants able to support hundreds of times their own weight, and they show grasshoppers leaping what would be equivalent of several city blocks for a man. So, and that's it. When you turn the next page, it jumps right into the story. So that's all you get for the origin of Superman. So Mark, we're going to start with you. I mean, you've probably read this a million times, but what's your impression of this first version of Superman's origin?
Well, it is interesting how because we take it for granted, all of these meta humans, these stories about extraordinary characters, when at that time, Tarzan, Doc Savage, there might have been, humans with, very at their peak physicality, but introducing a character like this that could wasn't godlike in his invulnerability, but still could withstand and do more things than any normal human could. And that splash page of showing grasshoppers and ants is kind of like, yeah, well, here's the physics of it as we understand it. It's quite fun, but I could see for an audience at that time in the 30s, and you're introducing a whole new concept of this swashbuckling character that can't fly, but he can jump over a skyscraper. Trying to just take a moment to explain how he does it. Right,
and we should also point out Superman. I mean, was so popular when he first came out that within, I think, a year or two, he'd already had a radio show. Then he had a cartoon. Then he was in the Macy's Day Parade. Like, he was unbelievably popular. We should all remember that. Yeah. So, Josh, what was your impression of this origin?
Yeah, it's great. I've definitely seen this multiple times, and it was great kind of jumping back in and getting a refresher, but also I really, really like the scientific explanation of Clark Kent's strength. That's really cool. I love that they kind of explain it away through science. Like they're trying to come up with a real world reason why he's able to do all of these amazing things, and comparing him to ants and grasshoppers. I think that's really fun, and it really kind of shows that it wasn't just a gimmick. Like, it's really thought out even from the start. Right. So yeah, this one might have been my favorite of all of the kind of origins we're going to be talking about.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, and also we should, before we get into the other versions, let's just recall Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster were Jewish. There's echoes of Moses here, right? Being hiding from, I think it was the Pharaoh. And so they put Moses in a little basket and put him, sent him down the Nile. And then he's discovered by, I don't remember who it was in the movie, but Gene Simmons. Anyway, and so, yeah, there's echoes of that, and obviously there's a little bit of a Christ-like figure in Superman, the champion of the oppressed. Remember, in this, he was not the Man of Steel, he was not the Man of Tomorrow yet. He was the champion of the oppressed, which I love. And if you go in through and read the early stories, there was a lot of that, like fighting for the rights of workers and poor people and, wrongly accused people and stuff like that. So this is my favorite era.
I think they talk about it a little bit in some of the stories we're going to be talking about today too. So, right. Which I didn't know actually a whole lot about. I didn't realize, at first he was more of a, down to earth kind of Right. I think it makes him more human. It takes this alien, this messiah, and makes him, one of us kind of thing. So right. Yeah, really interesting.
Yep. Okay, so now, only, a year later, they published Superman #1. Now, again, back in those days, most of these characters did not have their own book. You'd have, say, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, and I think the Flash might have been all. And the funny thing is the Flash first appeared in Flash Comics #1, but it was not because. It's not because he was the Flash. It's because they had all these generic names like Thrilling Comics and whatever comics and Flash Comics. And it just so happened he was also called the Flash. But when he got his own book, they had to give it a different name. So they called it All Flash Quarterly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, isn't that funny? So anyway, Superman did have his own book within a year. So now they've expanded his origin to 2 pages.
Yeah, that's right.
So, Mark, would you like to do the honors for this one?
Yeah, well, again, I think owing to the fact that they were also, except they had started the newspaper strip.
Sure.
They hadn't yet started the radio program, right? It was just
I don't think so.
print.
No.
But just able to expand a little bit on on that origin. The baby's still in there. The super giant baby, the super strong baby. I'm just looking it up here on my.
Sure is.
Oh, sorry. You know what? Yeah, because I've got the link open. Would that be easier if we resent you the link right now?
No, that's okay.
Okay.
It's fun having a book in my hands because we're talking about books, but just trying to find the right page. Oh my, of Superman #1. Sorry.
No problem.
No worries.
Because it was just like I said, this happened so fast. This happened so fast for these people. The success of it, I think they're so busy trying to put out the content, they didn't realize what an explosion that it actually was.
Right.
Right.
I'm surprised it happened so quickly with like getting the radio show, and the spinoff was within the same year. That's I didn't realize. And then even what you were saying with like the Macy's Day Parade float, like within the first year is crazy.
It might have been 2 years, but it was like a phenomenon.
I'm trying to think of something that has gotten that much attention, that has like been such a big part of mainstream pop culture immediately.
It was as early as 1941 that they had produced the first Fleischer animated cartoon.
Wow!
So 3 years.
So that was just within a couple years, it was just crossing all of the medium.
That's amazing. Incredible.
Wow. And for this next story that we're going to be talking about too, I'm surprised. I guess now knowing it's not even been a year yet, but I was surprised that we were getting another origin and we hadn't expanded yet on Krypton.
Right.
Or even really what happened on the planet that day when he was sent to Earth.
Well, the other thing I want to point out, because we don't really talk about this, and this is something I didn't learn until I was older. Superman himself does not learn he's from Krypton until he's been published for like 10 years.
Oh, wow.
So it's not like, because later in the comics, they introduced the idea of, he was a 2-year-old when he got rocketed to Earth and he could already talk and he was already smart. But in the original comics, he didn't even learn he was a Kryptonian until he was exposed to kryptonite. And he, I think he like looked out into space with his telescope vision.
Right.
And he could see like the remnants. He's like, oh, that explains it. You know what I mean? Like, they would never do that in the comics now. Like, now granted, in the movie, like in the Richard Donner movie, he's like mid-20s or whatever, early 20s when he finds out, which is pretty cool. But I think it'd be great. Imagine to do a Superman movie where even the viewer doesn't find out, even though they know, they don't reveal it until later on. That'd be cool. But anyway. So, Mark, how you doing with that story? Did you find it yet?
No, I don't know. It's in here somewhere. Yeah.
Do you want us to summarize it? Do you want us to summarize it?
I agree with what you're saying. It is like we're so used to knowing more and more and more about Krypton, or even just that that struggle between a scientist, someone who has identified a problem and is ignored.
Yes. And, we see that going on nowadays. Recourse
but to just try and save the most precious thing that he has. To save his own son, and possibly, knowing he'll be the last of the entire race.
Right.
Right.
But yeah, like you said, it's just that it took years to really introduce that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did you want me to do like a real quick recap of this one? Do you want to pull up Superboy?
Sure.
Mark?
I'll pull up. Oh.
Do you want to like pull up Superboy and you can recap that one? I'll do this one real quick.
All right. Let me.
While you're searching, I'll recap this one. So again, we start off with just the one panel of this planet exploding and a spaceship is flying away from the destruction. We do get the name drop of the planet. The doomed planet of Krypton explodes to fragments. And we actually see it's Ma and Pa Kent this time that find the spaceship and take baby Superman over to an orphan asylum, what they call it, and we see that again, that same picture of strong baby Superman holding up a piece of furniture, and then Mom and Pa Kent come back a few days later talking about how they couldn't stop thinking about the baby. So we see the same picture or same panel of baby Superman holding up a piece of furniture.
It is slightly different. It's not the same.
It's not the same. Yeah, it's redrawn. It's kind of done in this style and by this artist. And then we see Mom and Pa Kent. They come back to the orphanage and they are talking about how they haven't been able to stop thinking about this little baby that they dropped off and they want to adopt it, which is kind of interesting. So I guess in this version they legally adopted Clark, where in like modern day versions of Superman, it's kind of just like they've got this alien, this kid that's not really theirs.
Miracle baby. They're an elderly couple and it's just like, oh yeah, no, we just had a baby.
Yeah, right.
On the farm.
So they're able to adopt the baby. They name him Clark Kent, and we see a panel of Pa Kent kind of talking to him and telling him that, like, you're different, you have these abilities, but you have to hide them for now from society because you will be shunned and, people will be scared of you. And Ma Kent comes in and says, but when the proper time comes, you must use it to assist humanity. And then we cut to the future and we see like adolescent, like young adult Superman leaping over buildings, and we get that kind of like raise tremendous weights and run faster than a streamlined train. And then we also get a little bit of a new panel where this doctor is trying to give Clark a shot in his arm, and the needle keeps breaking. And of course, Clark's just like, yeah, try again, Doc. And then we see, before this new origin or this updated origin ends, we see that both of his foster parents have passed, and he is now donning the Superman costume, and he's going out into society and being the hero he was always meant to be.
Right. So I guess, okay, so here's the thing is that, for anyone that knows the complicated DC history with Earth 1 and Earth 2 and all these different versions, this stuff is usually treated as if it's Earth 2 Superman. I personally think I prefer Superman to not have been Superboy, that's for sure. This idea of him being adopted and then the parents coming back is a little awkward. I can see them losing that. But otherwise, everything else about this is pretty cool. I like the idea also of the Kents dying. Like, let's be clear, the Kents were never kept alive until after 1986 when John Byrne rebooted Superman, right? So I personally like that idea. But Mark, I know there's not much difference between this one and the last one, but what do you think about this one compared to the other one?
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right about just like developing the Kents more, right? Giving him, that family that found him and claimed him and raised him, and then I think I did enjoy, I got to admit, I did enjoy Superboy comics as a kid myself, but because as a kid you see yourself in more in a hero your own age, right? It's just like identifying with Robin rather than Batman when you're really young. But in terms of that hero's journey, right? He's not ready to face the world until after it's tragic. He had to lose another set of parents,
right?
But then he's ready to adopt the world.
Yeah, great point. I want to make a quick point. Something I noticed, because I've read a lot of Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey and all that stuff. One thing I noticed when I rewatched Bambi a few years ago, the Disney film, Bambi does not know that his father is his father until his mother dies. And the moment his mother is shot and killed, that's when the father starts talking to and basically explains, well, I don't know exactly what he says, but this is how things are. This is how things are going to be. And they also make the seasons of the film match up sort of like, I don't remember exactly how it goes, but I don't know where it starts, but you can see the seasons change to match the kind of phases of his life. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a great point you made, that he can't become Superman until his parents die, because that's like when he becomes a man, right? And that's like, again, going back to the hero's journey. And so with John Byrne keeping the Kents alive, the only benefit is that you're still kind of able to do a little bit of Superboy, because in the Superboy comics, he always had the Kents. But when he became a man, he didn't have the Kents. So I can understand why he wanted to keep them alive. But as far as an overall arc of a character, it's better to have him die before he becomes Superman.
Right.
But so, Josh, what do you think?
When is it that... There's a version where both of the Kents are alive, but there's also a version where it's just Pa Kent that dies, right? Or is that more of like even more modern? I
think... Okay, here we go. Based on my faulty memory,
right,
I think that, as we can see in these versions, sometimes Pa dies first, sometimes Ma dies first. In the comics, for 30 years, like from, say, the 60s, 70s, and 80s, it was always Pa that died first. And then now, honestly, I don't know what the continuity is, but I believe at some point, Pa did die again, right? Okay. And then Ma was alive. But as of today, I honestly have no idea.
It's because I'm not a huge Superman fan. I haven't read a lot of Superman comics, so most of my knowledge of him is from the shows or movies. Right. So from my POV, I always thought that it was just Pa Kent that passed away from cancer, I believe, and it was more of like a representation of like that's something that Clark can't save people from, right? It's like something that's out of his power. And then I think Ma Kent is kept alive in the movies.
In the Richard Donner movie, she does die, but it's off screen.
Oh, okay.
So it's a heart attack, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, off screen though. So because as of Superman 1, Pa dies. When he goes to Metropolis, he's still sending money back to his silver-haired mother. That's the kind of like the joke. So we know she's still alive. But then when he returns to the farm in Superman 3, she's dead. So she died off screen.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, so otherwise, Josh, you kind of talked about this origin, but what'd you think about this one versus the first one?
Yeah, it's also pretty good. It is. I like that Ma and Pa are the ones that find the spaceship rather than just some random dude. It is a little weird that they go back to the orphanage, but I think that maybe it feels strange because it's condensed into like a page, right? So it's like one panel they drop them off, and then 2 panels later they're back again. So if we had maybe like a full story or time to see them kind of develop their regret or something of dropping him off, it would feel fine. But because it's such a quick, snappy origin, it does feel strange that they drop him off and then immediately regret it. It almost feels like they drove away and then they're like, you know what, maybe let's not, and they turn back like within minutes, right? But it's a pretty solid origin and a good refresher for his debut title. So yeah.
And then we're not going to get into the main story, but it is actually the same story with 3 pages added to the beginning of it just to expand on it a little bit more. But otherwise, it's the same story from Action Comics #1. And it's a page turner. Yeah, it's enjoyable for sure. I recommend it. It's fun. But anyway, now we're going to talk about Superman's next origin, which is where the major revisions begin. This is More Fun Comics #101, which is the first appearance of Superboy. And this story is so important that Superboy does not even appear on the cover. It's just if you look at the cover, it's just Green Arrow and Speedy battling a knight. So it doesn't even mention Superboy on the cover, which is shocking. But anyway,
I wonder if this was just supposed to be like a kind of one-off little like story at first. Then
it's possible, but I think he appears in the next issue.
Oh, okay. Well,
Superboy. So yeah.
So would this have been like? Would this have been like page 1, 2, 3, or
no? It was actually page 20. I think it was 24. The story starts. The one you've got right there.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, did you want to quickly summarize that one then, or do you have the full story, or no?
No, I apologize. The links that you sent me, I'm just right now. I can only see the radio program, so I don't even have what I read previously. So I can't break it down like specifically.
Okay,
like
well,
you
then,
guys are
no
doing.
worries.
It's okay. I can do this one then, Josh.
Sure,
and you
yeah.
can do the next one if you want. Okay. So now we got more. Jesus. Okay. More Fun Comics, which is a great title. More Fun Comics 101, featuring the first appearance of Superboy. So the main difference here, we're going to find out very quickly, is that Superman donned his costume when he was a boy. We start off with Krypton finally named. Now, I'm not sure if this is the first time Krypton's named in the comics, but it's one of the first times. But we get...
Well, it's named in the origin from...
Oh, in the last one.
The last one, yeah.
Right,
yeah.
Superman number 1. Okay. So we can see a little bit more of the architecture of Krypton here, some futuristic looking buildings, some weird kind of flying devices in the back. Now, I'm a huge fan of Silver Age Superman. These costumes they're wearing are pretty ugly. Like
Right.
Jor-El, like everyone has these weird red and blue patterns, but with a big jagged line splitting it down the middle, and it's just an eyesore in my opinion. But
Right.
it's funny because again, I thought I'd read every version of Superman's origin, but I've never read this one. But they go into detail about how the force of gravity on Krypton is greater, and so that explains. They're like, they're like reading a newspaper. They're like, well, if we go to planet Earth, we could take an ordinary step and leap over the tallest building. And we should point out that in the movies, Krypton is so far away it's in another galaxy, but clearly in these comics, Krypton is close enough that they can like see it with a telescope
Right.
and just study it. Right? It's like it's just down the way. So anyway, like they show like these planes flying overhead, and they're kind of making these jokes like 900 miles per hour, a bit disappointing, Perry. His name's Perry, but it's Kryptonian, so it's Perry. Yes, we should be able to produce spaceships of sufficient power and speed to reach other planets. Ha ha ha. So anyway, so then right away we jump into what's going on with Krypton, and Lara is talking to Jor-El, and we find out that Jor-El is working on some experiments, and it has to do with him designing the spaceship. And basically, he's talking to Lara. He's like, once again, I must try to convince them that Krypton is doomed, right? This is where the classic part comes in. So we can see earthquakes. They're talking about the sky is getting darker, et cetera, et cetera. So then we cut over to this Supreme Council of Krypton. And we see a bunch of people wearing the exact same ugly
Right.
blue and red shirt, right? And Jor-El is trying to convince them that something is wrong with Krypton, and the only way that they can save the Kryptonian race is to use these spaceships that he's designing. But they are not believing his story. They won't listen to him. So he's like, okay, well, at least I can save my family. But then there's not really enough time to build a bigger ship. So there's only this one ship left. But he does point out that it can fit both the baby and Lara. So he tries to convince Lara to jump in with the baby, but she's like, nope, my place here is with you, but at least our son can be saved. So we see the rocket ship flying away. We see Krypton explode. Then we see the rocket land on Earth. And then we see the baby discovered. Is Pa named? No, it's a passing motorist again. It just says a passing motorist. Now, for all we know, this is Pa Kent, but they don't explicitly say that. So let's just assume it's the same passing motorist from Action Comics #1. So we see, again, like Josh mentioned, the same basic panel of the baby holding the chair up over his head, right? Great shot. Then it says here, later the infant was adopted by a childless couple named Kent. So we can assume that the passing motorist is different from the Kent. So they're going back to the original version. We see little baby Clark Kent carrying like giant logs of wood. We see him jumping over a house, outrunning. Well, he's not really outrunning, but he's running past a bunch of deer and like some rabbits in like a forest. And then we see him, this is a new development. We finally see him in school. And so there's a bunch of kids in school, and he's thinking to himself, I can't let people know how different I am. I'll just have to hold myself in check and go along like all the other kids. So that's pretty cool. Here's another scene we've never seen before. We see a car. Looks like someone was trying to change a tire in a car, and the car's falling on top of them. And two teenagers are trying to lift up the car to get the kid out, and they can't. Clark Kent runs along, lifts up the car easily, and they're like, "Golly, Clark, how'd you do that? I wouldn't believe it if I hadn't seen it." And Clark says, "I guess something happened just for a minute to give me super strength." I mean, that's a logical explanation, right? So then we cut back over to Clark again. Like he's making all these decisions on his own. We don't see him getting advice from the Kents this time. It's just him figuring it all out on his own, which is kind of cool. So then he's like, at the end, he's like, "Super strength. It's a little frightening. My powers give me the chance to do a lot of good, but I can't let people know that Clark Kent can do these things. The knowledge might be dangerous. So," and then the narration, "Clark Kent secretly fashions a colorful red and blue costume and thus is born Superboy." So this, again, is the first time that we learn the revised history of Superman, in which he became a superhero when he was a boy, which is what we call a retcon. This is the first major retcon of Superman. Josh, what'd you think of this origin?
I really like the origin. If it were just Superman.
Okay.
I think that I like to see that he was struggling with this as a kid, and that this is something that he's been dealing with his whole life, and having to hide it and act normal and feeling like an outcast is really interesting. So this kind of really it's the same thing, but then at the end there's this like tacked on little kind of continuation of the kid getting trapped underneath the car when they're changing the tires or whatever. So that's pretty fun. But then the fact that it's kind of retconning it as like, actually he's been a superhero in the costume this whole time. It feels very much like they're capitalizing on this being a marketable character that kids like. It feels very Muppet Babies.
Yes.
Where it's like
Flintstone kids, exactly.
Kind of like going back and retconning. Right. Like, actually, no, when they were all together in a daycare. He's been Superman this entire time.
Right.
But as far as origins go, it's pretty good. But I don't necessarily think it's gotten me excited to go read Superboy comics. At least not today, as an adult, right?
Now, I'll have you know, before we go any further, that I've read a lot of Superboy comics from the 60s, and they're arguably as fun or more fun than the Superman ones, just because they're kind of more quaint. He's on the farm. It's just a different vibe. Mark, what do you think? Like, are you a fan of Superboy as a character?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, it's that he's still learning lessons, but it's that kind of youthful exuberance that sometimes, I almost gave myself away. He's not dealing with, generally not dealing with earth-shattering villains and those types of problems. And I think, they struggled with the idea of, Batman's got Robin. They couldn't come up with a sidekick. And so this, like I said, a marketable, another marketable book or two was to have, to have a teenage Superman, have a Superboy. And yeah, they couldn't have an adventure together, but like I said, it just, it was all about how many different titles could they get on the newsstand every month.
And it was crazy because if you look at the bestseller lists from, say, 1964, 65, 66, I'm not kidding. It's Superman, Action Comics, World's Finest Comics, Adventure Comics with Superboy, Lois Lane, Jimmy Olsen. Like, the first 7 comics are all Superman comics or Superman spinoffs. Like, that's how big he was. It was like a mini universe of its own. It was crazy. But as far as the details of this origin, Mark, are you a fan of the blue and red shirts that the Kryptonians all wore?
I am no, not at all. And
okay.
It's you could see how it would still take them a long time to really tweak Krypton. It's not just the corny jokes, but that at first explaining that they were so far ahead of normal humans by thousands of years, not only intellectually and culturally, but they could leap tall buildings.
Yeah,
without even coming to Earth, that they were super special.
It's weird. I just want to point out, you're right. It's an important detail, because as time went on, they would say, "Oh, Superman only has powers because he's on Earth, because of the low gravity, because of the yellow sun." But yeah, you're right. At this point, they were all Supermans. They're all superhuman. So it was almost like this detail that hadn't quite worked out yet.
Right. And which we're going to be talking about with the next one, because they do kind of explain that. I believe it's in this next one. I don't know if we're ready to move on.
Not yet. I just want to know, Mark, with this with this version of Superman's origin, is there anything you liked more or less than the previous two we read?
Well, like I said, I have a kind of love-hate thing with Superboy, where I did enjoy a lot of those comics, but getting the suit and flying around and all that before he was ready, I just fun story, right? Further developing the character of Clark Kent and Superman, but I not a big fan of retconning in that way. Yeah.
I think that's what it comes down to, is Superboy on its own is a great character, and they're great comics, but for Superman, it's better to keep Superman as Superman, and only Superman. That's how I see it. That's why, like, with however many Silver Age revivals they do, I'm glad they've never really brought back this version of Superboy, which I'm sure we'll get to in another episode. We'll talk about that. But yeah, so I'm a fan of this, but I do prefer the original origin. And I also want to point out, before we go further, this was written by Jerry Siegel and drawn by Joe Shuster as well. So whereas the next issue will not be, which is the first time we see a full explanation for Superman's origin, and that's in Superman number 53, which was published on the 10th anniversary of Superman. And Josh, I believe you're going to tell us what happens in this one, right?
Sure. Yeah. So again, we actually get a little bit of a recap of Superman's powers and abilities before we get to the origin and what happened on Krypton. So
right.
We see his super strength, his impenetrable skin. We talk about his X-ray vision, fighting bad guys, and then we also see kind of an update on this with he uses his wonderful powers to aid worthy causes, and we see him moving entire buildings to more affordable neighborhoods. Right.
See, that's what I'm talking about.
We need a Superman right now, honestly.
Right. Yeah.
But then we quickly kind of jump back in time to tell his origin and see a little bit more of a deeper view, or more in-depth view. And we talk about Krypton and the Kryptonians, who are humans of high intelligence and magnificent physical perfection. We also learn that the force of gravity on Krypton was far greater than on Earth. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the ships that they have to develop are very lightweight, and they're kind of just normal humans on Krypton who are very intelligent and kind of look pretty, essentially. And so that's kind of how we it's kind of, I guess, probably the origin of how Superman has his powers on Earth, right? Like,
this is probably the first time they mention it. Yeah. So
again, we see we don't see Pa Kent. We see Superman's father talking to a scientist and talking about how they've been doing calculations, and they found this planet called Earth, and it could like a normal step could be a leap over one of their tallest buildings. So they're explaining that with their proportionate strength on Earth, with the low gravity, they would actually be able to do these magnificent things. And this might be a good alternative for them, since they know Krypton is dying. So again, we see this kind of all of these great scientists of Krypton, the Council of Five. Mm-hmm. I guess it's a lot less than last time. There seems to be like a whole boardroom last time.
The Pentagonate.
But we see him step up, and he says, "Gentlemen, Krypton is doomed." And once again, they laugh him off. He explains what's going on with his spaceship prototype, and he rushes off home to his wife, who is explaining what's going on. And as he's like explaining to her, listen, they didn't listen to my plan. I don't know what we're gonna do. The Krypton starts exploding. So quickly they come up with the idea that his mom and him are going to go in the spaceship and go to Earth. But again, she refuses and says that her life is here on Krypton, and they're just going to send the baby off. So the rocket shoots up into the sky, headed towards Earth, as we see Krypton collapse and explode in on itself. And we see the ship crash lands on Earth, and again it kind of switches back where it's Ma and Pa Kent that runs into the spaceship, and they hear crying from inside, and they pull out the baby, and as they pull the baby out, the ship explodes, and they realize nobody's going to believe them. So they do bring him to an orphanage, and this time, instead of lifting up a piece of furniture, we see baby Clark lifting a human, an adult man. So they actually call Ma and Pa, or he's also swinging from chandeliers and jumping up and down, like touching the ceiling. So they call Ma and Pa Kent, and they're like, listen, we can't deal with this kid. You're going to have to take him back. So they take him back. We again get a kind of a similar origin where he's got super strength, where he even gets run over by a tractor and nothing happens to him. He's an adult now, and he's racing trains and jumping over buildings. And we also see this origin, which is the one I'm more familiar with, which is Pa Kent getting sick and dying, and with his dying words, with his dying breath, he leaves Clark with the words of like, this is your time. It's you're a Superman, remember, because that's what you are, a Superman. And that's where his origin starts. And we see him a couple years later with both John and Mary Kent. He's visiting their graves, and we see the last panel is him finally in the costume as Superman.
So let's just talk about some of the details that are significantly different here, which, Josh, you mentioned a couple of them, but now Jor-El no longer has his blue and red shirt. He still doesn't have his classic Silver Age costume. He has a red shirt with green sleeves, so now he's using almost like a Robin color scheme, right?
Right. And I should point out, since Becca's not here, I feel like I should point out that he is wearing like a red crop top. Because I feel like that's something she would hone in on immediately.
It kind of is, eh?
But yeah, he's got this like red cut off crop top almost with like a just a planet, generic planet with a ring around it.
Right. Saturn-like planet, yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I didn't notice that. There's obviously, it's more expanded. There's more panels. There's more detail. But I just want to point out that even though most of Krypton is very futuristic looking, you'll notice the rocket ship that's getting ready to like fly off into space, right next to it, it's like a chair that like I have in my living room. You see that chair?
Right.
And there's like a little stool and like paintings on the wall. So it's like, in some areas, the art's very creative. In other areas, it's just very like, okay, whatever. Oh, and by the way, we should point out, this is not Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. It's now Bill Finger, Batman co-creator, on script, and the art is by Wayne Boring, who's like the most prolific Superman artist of the Golden Age. So the art is much more sophisticated, but yeah, like as we were saying, like some of the details are very well thought out, but like again, we see all these futuristic looking towers crumbling. They almost look like again, I'm not an expert in architecture, but they almost look like Constantinople, like Muslim towers, you know, with those curves and everything. But then the next panel, it looks like the Empire State Building.
Yeah, right? And then like even the cars just look like Earth cars at the time.
Right.
Like on page 5, that
Yeah,
first
you're
panel,
totally
there's
right.
just like a car there.
Yeah, you're
Like
totally right.
if you saw the Batmobile go by, the '60s Batmobile, it would have fit right
would
in.
have fit.
Right. Yeah.
You're totally right.
And I wonder too, like, this is also like the future according to the 40s, right?
Sure.
Like this is the ideal future back then. So I wonder if maybe it was just like it looked cool or it was fashionable then, a lot of this stuff. So it was kind of like, yeah, of course they would have it, but they would have future versions of that. And then today we're kind of looking at it like, it's just a car.
Yeah, 100%.
This kind of looks like a car, but
I also love how when the rocket is flying towards Earth, the continent of North America is so much like it sticks out so far from the rest of the globe. If this was a real, like, if this is what Earth was like North America would be like 1,000 miles higher than like the ocean, right? Like, it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
But anyway, it's fun. And then the next panel, I love how this is interesting because when the rocket crashes, clearly in the background there's a city. It's not. They don't say anywhere that it's Smallville. It's just this car with this old couple, but in the background is all these skyscrapers, right? So again, at that. Oh, this is something we haven't even mentioned yet. Where's Superboy? Right?
Yeah. So, I guess they've got.
I have to point out for all you know, there's this weird segment of like the fan population that's like, if you match up all the details together, X-Files takes place in the same universe as Supernatural, and you're like, why would anyone care about that, right? Well, back then, continuity between characters was not important, but even continuity in like between different titles of the same character was not important at DC. So at this point, the regular Superman character was technically not ever Superboy. They didn't acknowledge Superboy. It was just completely separate and no one questioned it, right? Interesting. But anyway, Ma and Pa Kent look completely different than the other Ma and Pa Kent. They're much thinner now, right?
Right.
They're almost like more upper class. They don't look like they're farmers, right? They're kind of dressed more like dandies, I guess you'd call them. We do see them adopting Clark Kent, like Josh said. Some of the details are different. It's expanded. We see them driving through, again, this could be like a country town, but it's not a farm. It's more like suburban houses with trees and like a white picket fence in the back. But when Clark does have that accident with the, what's it called? The tractor. Yeah. He is clearly on a farm, so we can assume that's his farm. And then...
I think it's a strange choice to have the city so close in the background in that first panel where they're driving by, but it looks like they're driving on this like dirt road with grass and fields behind them, and then even when they're driving to their house with Clark later on, they're driving by like a suburban area and the roads are still dirt. So I'm assuming that they're kind of just close by to the city, or maybe they were on a trip in the city and driving back into town or something when they found Clark. But
well, that's the thing, is I think it's implied in the earlier comics that Smallville was kind of like, it wasn't Kansas, it was kind of just again, I don't know the exact American geography that it's supposed to match, but even if you're in New York State, you can just go a few hundred miles north and it's all just forest, right? So for all we know, they were just in New York State. We don't know. But yeah, otherwise, so Mark, what did you think about this origin of Superman?
Well, I mean, one thing I really liked was that seeing the planet Earth as a solution, right? Where some of the earlier versions where they were just like, oh yeah, Earth. We watched, we watched them all the time. There's the only other planet nearby. Whereas this one, we found we discovered this place, and that's that could be our salvation, or at least for one of us. And just expanding on that, once he gets there, he'll be a Superman. He'll be a super being. And I do like the developing aesthetic of Krypton. I know in like later in the films and things like that, it's almost like looking at the planet Vulcan, where you've got advanced technology, but the planet itself is very, very rugged, very hostile.
Right.
Right?
Yes. Good point. Good point. It's almost like a trope of science fiction. Even the Klingons. The Klingons are a spacefaring race, but they like kill each other for like looking at each other wrong,
Right,
and
yeah.
like and all these weird rituals they have. Like, how could they be that primitive on a one-on-one basis, but still developed interstellar travel and all that stuff? So it's kind of just a trope of science fiction. Yeah, it's kind of funny.
I do, and with the orphanage, and it's probably the very first urban legend is this, super baby in an orphanage, right? Everybody's heard this story somewhere. They don't know where it took place, but in some orphanage somewhere, there was a little baby that could lift a man and swing around and everything. Because they just, like, again, continuity. It's such a naive kind of worldview. Because nowadays, in Firestarter and Brightburn, these kinds of things, where it's like, nope, we're going to, a government agency is going to get a hold of that kid.
Right. Good point. Good point. And that's the thing, is you're right, is beyond even the government getting involved, wouldn't the people that worked in this orphanage go, hey, wait a minute, now there's a teenager that's really strong. Oh, now there's a guy named Superman, right? Wouldn't they put two and two together if this baby was in this orphanage? I think that's why they got rid of that detail, right? Is so there's no real glaring evidence that this kid was ever around with all these superpowers. So yeah, I do like them sticking with the original as much as possible, but the orphanage doesn't really work. Josh, what are you going to say?
No, I think it also makes his adoptive parents way more likable and endearing. The fact that they noticed something right away, that something was different about this baby, and they knew that he wouldn't be accepted into society, so they chose to take care of him themselves. Right. So the orphanage doesn't do it for me, for sure. It's a little strange, but I do really like the beginning, though. I think that this stuff on Krypton is really fun. I really, really like the explanation of Clark's powers on Earth, and like you were saying, how they were like studying Earth to kind of like, oh, this might be a great planet for us to move to, and on top of that, not only would we like survive on this planet, but we would thrive. Like, we would do great on this planet. So that's really fun. And it also kind of makes it a little bit more believable that his mother wouldn't go with him. I think that was like a small detail in some of the other origins that was like a little strange, because the other ones were so quick. You didn't really have time to think about why she wouldn't want to go with her infant son to another planet. But knowing that like this planet is going to be great for a Kryptonian, and we would actually do better on this planet and be superhuman, is kind of almost like reassurance that he's going to be fine, that nothing's going to be able to hurt him on this planet. So maybe makes it a little bit more like believable that she would leave him behind or send him off.
Good point.
And I think too, in updated versions, I don't even think that she could fit in the pod, right? Like,
no, I don't think so.
Yeah, I think even the show, which we talked about on our other podcast, the first episode of the Superman show, it was a prototype ship. So it wasn't even a full spaceship that people could fit in. It was a prototype, and really only an infant could go into it. And it kind of lends to the analogy that you were talking about earlier with like the Moses putting the baby in the basket and floating it down the river. It really feels like, okay, nothing else can really fit besides our baby, and sending it off to Earth. But yeah, this one is pretty good as well. I really like the Kryptonian stuff in particular.
I also want to point out, because let's talk about the art, because Wayne Boring is the seminal sort of golden age Superman artist. Not every panel is good, but it's very clear that at least on a technical level he's better than Joe Shuster. He might have swiped I mean, all these artists swiped from other artists, but some of the art's not great. But this opening splash page of Superman with his head in his hands, I think is incredible. Mm-hmm. And you can see how skilled he is with his like brush or whatever. Like the lines on his face to me are perfect. Like that is a great shot. If you go throughout the book, he's just. I mean, he's not as good as Kurt Swan, who's my favorite Superman artist, but his lines are very graceful. The layouts are dynamic. You can even see when Jor-El is talking to the Council of the Five, you can see the heads around the table. There's the one that's at a weird angle, and it's just to give it a better composition. I just like those choices like that, you know? And if you look, the body language is better. I mean, I love Joe Shuster, but Wayne
even
Boring
just the character, even just those scientists in that like group. And on the next page, that first panel, like one of them is like thinking. He's got his hands clasped together, and his like chin is like resting on his fist, like he's thinking. And it's not just like a bunch of characters sitting in like neutral position. Like they feel a little bit more real in this one. It definitely feels like comics as a whole have kind of like developed, not just necessarily these artists or Superman. It definitely, you can definitely feel the jump of like comic strips to comic books.
Good point. We should also point out comic books had been invented like 3 years before Superman appeared. Like the comic strip existed, but the comic book was invented by DC, right? Like the idea of publishing new material. So yes, it's an art form in its infancy. But Mark, what did you think of the art in this one compared to the other three?
Well, it's like I said, trying to expand, but also trying to. It's like codifying. You know, this is the 10th anniversary, yeah, so there's just it's just a sense of the importance of trying to establish something that it's going to be canon, right? That's going to that we recognize as pretty much the story, right? It's it'd be like how long before after the baby Jesus story. The nativity written, and it's like, okay, well, maybe take out that part and put that in, but yeah, like I said, by this time,
and they actually did that with the 4 Gospels. But anyway, we won't get into that. Yeah, right.
But yeah, no, I really like how, as you said, Josh, that the medium itself, right, where where it had developed to, and it just makes for an exciting story. So I'm sure as a special edition or whatever, when it came out, it was probably really anticipated.
Right. Yeah, I mean.
So at this point, this is the 10th anniversary of Superman, right? So that we've had time to kind of develop his origin. So the show had already come out. The radio show had been out or maybe has ended at this point, I'm assuming. The cartoon as well with the, so it's like, is this the first time we've gotten this in depth of?
Absolutely.
Krypton?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It's the first time it's all been put together, I think, in this amount of detail.
Wow.
Because this would have been, so if this is 48, the TV show would have started maybe 3 years later. So it's still, again, 10 years is a long time, but in the overall scheme of Superman, this is still early on. Like, they're still figuring out things as they go along, right? Like, even Jimmy Olsen, even though he was created in the radio show, he didn't become really popular until the TV show because of the way he was portrayed by, I don't remember the actor's name, but he was so popular. That's why he got his own comic. Because it was the TV show. So it's just interesting to see the way that the character developed over the years. So,
wow.
And the thing about this is, I've read a lot of Golden Age comics. They're not all great. Sometimes they're a trudge to get through. But I just love Superman so much that I could read probably any Golden Age Superman story. So eventually I'm going to, my goal, one of my life goals, some people, they want to get married and have kids. I just want to read every Superman comic, that's me. Lofty goals. But anyway, Mark, have you read a lot of Golden Age Superman comics?
No, probably. I mean, I grew up in the Silver Age, right? So that's what I was collecting. Golden Age stuff might have been we especially once I started having kids, and it was really hard to budget for buying a lot of comics and graphic novels, just going to the library, accessing the library. So there's all kinds of those compendiums, right? You can just pull out a great big old book, and it's got all the Golden Age comics. So that's probably where I I'm most familiar with going back and over those stories. It is interesting. It's like watching Humphrey Bogart movie.
Sure.
Right? You're watching something that was a piece of art that was made in a different time. So there's big differences stylistically, right? The dialogue and from what we're used to now after close to 100 years of comic books.
Right.
Graphic novels and all the other media. So the Golden Age, some of them are really fun, but also just a lot of the restrictions that were placed on storytelling, so that it wouldn't corrupt little minds.
Sure. Yeah, I do like Golden Age. As we discussed earlier, the Superman from the Golden Age I like with the types of things he dealt with, but the actual art and the storytelling, I prefer the 60s, the Silver Age, much more. I would rather read like the Mort Weisinger era, say 58 to 66 is probably my favorite era. The art's beautiful by Kurt Swan and Wayne Boring. The characters, again, the Superboy stories, being on the farm and all that stuff. Now, I know that usually we like to read the original versions, and some people don't like the modern reprints, but there was that little golden period of reprints from the late 80s to early 90s when a lot of reprints were done in Baxter format trade paperbacks. So if you get a chance to get the original editions of the greatest Superman stories ever told, they're on this thick white paper with these beautiful colors that match the style of the old Golden Age comics. But they're done in just a way that they're, how modern reprints are a little bit too bright, a little bit too saturated.
Slick.
This is like, this is a sweet spot. So if you ever get a chance to check those out, definitely do it. So that's it. So that is part one of our exploration of Superman, because we will eventually be exploring the many other origins of Superman throughout the years. We would like to thank Mark Lefebvre for joining us, Mark. It's been great. Sorry about all the technical problems we had at the beginning.
Oh, it's all on my end. I'm just I'm old school. I like using a whiteboard and just wanting to find out. Call Martha. We've got to get that recipe for bat soup. It's so good. I really appreciate you guys inviting me to come on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, of course.
And for those out there that where can we see you next? What are you up to in the next few months?
Performing Family Day just right around the corner, downtown Windsor. The first robotics competition.
Interesting.
They're bringing that back, after a couple of years of COVID making it, a virtual event. So I'll be at that's at the end of March at the University of Windsor, where, it's really brilliant minds creating robots to compete against one another. So I'll be performing there and just looking forward to acting, singing, dancing whenever I can.
That's great. Excellent. Okay, well, there you go. We want to thank you again for joining us. And just for all of our many hundreds of millions of listeners out there, our next episode of Slam will feature none other than Zatara and Zatanna. Zatara, who first appeared in Action Comics #1. For those of you that don't know, Zatara is the father, Zatanna is the daughter. Zatanna is Bex Luthor's favorite character, so hopefully she can make that episode. But before we do that, our next episode of Taped Crusaders will feature special guest Barry Helmer, and he's going to help us review the ill-fated pilot of Wonder Woman featuring Kathy Lee Crosby. So be sure to join us for that. And Josh, you can take it from here.
Yeah, we also want to thank you guys so much for listening to the podcast. It really helps when you keep in touch, leave reviews or comments. You can find us on our website at thecomicbooksyndicate.com, or you can find us on YouTube or Facebook at the same name. Please let us know what you guys think about the podcast and the comics and things we're talking about. We want to keep that comics conversation going.
That's right. And until next time, we'll see you later.
Up and away.